All eyes in the Dynasty community are on rookie drafts right now, but rookie drafts are only one way you can improve your team. Trading is another, whether you're a contender vying for the championship this year or a rebuilder that's looking ahead a little bit. Theo Gremminger from Fantasy Points stops by today to talk about some of the players that contenders and rebuilders should be looking to acquire in trades, what to pay for those players, which players to be trying to move, and which ones you just might want to hold on to for a little bit longer. And that's next on Dynasty Compass. Welcome to Dynasty Compass. I am your host, Jeff Blaylock, the other Jeff B. from Football Guys. I'm excited to be joined today by Theo Gremminger, the OG. I think you've got probably the best social media handle in the business, Theo. Thanks so much for joining me. I know you have been really busy here since the draft. Appreciate you being here. How are you?
No, I'm happy to chop it up today. This is a busy time of year. It's really, really fun, though. It's like peak Dynasty season. So we're out there. We're grinding. I had a ton of rookie drafts that are kind of in the books at this point, but I'm in a couple of startups at this point, and it's best ball season too. So we're grinding a lot of best ball content as well. So it's just constant stuff. But yeah, happy to chop it up. First time chopping up with you. Big shout out to a bunch of your football guys, co-workers. A lot of them have podcasted with me over the years, and looking forward to doing this one today.
Awesome. Well, let's just jump into it. You mentioned the draft. I think that is where a lot of dynasty leagues are right now. And for some dynasty managers, this is their first foray back into fantasy football since the end of the year. So we'll get into the veteran winners and losers as we go through the landscape discussion. But who among the rookies where you thought were particularly winners or losers in terms of their landing spots?
I mean, no question, Carnell Tate, where he goes at 4th overall. And there's not enough discussion about how he lands with sort of a kingmaker in Brian Daboll, where there's a lot of like recent kind of Brian Daboll hatred. I think a lot of it stems from his lack of success as a head coach in New York. But if you look at what he's been able to do offensively, multiple times we've seen wide receivers on their first season with their new team, with Daboll running the show offensively, come in and absolutely smash. We saw it with how he integrated Stephon Diggs that first season in Buffalo, where Diggs was coming off of sort of a low-end wide receiver 2 production, high-end wide receiver 3 production year in Minnesota, where he ceded a lot of fantasy production to Adam Thielen, comes over to Buffalo and absolutely dominates with Josh Allen, challenges for wide receiver 1 overall. Then we see Malik Nabers 2 seasons ago have one of the best and highest usage rookie seasons we've ever seen. Unbelievable target share, unbelievable first read rate, sort of broke Fantasy Points data for what you were capable of. And now Carnell Tate steps into that situation where he's going to be the lead dog, not only in the passing game, but as the offensive focal point. So I think he landed quite well. Jordyn Tyson obviously landed really, really well. He's got a more target competition with Chris Olave there, and also a little bit pecking order competition. But Olave's missed a lot of time in the past with things like concussions. Yep. There's a pathway to sort of get out of Olave in 2027. So those guys really were fantastic. Obviously, my guy Jadarian Price landed extremely well. Yep. And Kenyon Sadiq, there's a lot of mixed opinions about him in fantasy, but his draft capital is very similar to guys like Brock Bowers, Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren. So he's in that sweet spot for this franchise really, really is excited about him. And I think there's a little bit of trepidation in like the fantasy marketplace now because of what are the Jets and all that sort of thing. But Kenyon Sadiq, look at the draft capital. It's a very good landing spot for him.
I love that you brought up Carnell Tate because I think a lot of fantasy managers and dynasty managers are looking at Tennessee and say, this offense is terrible. And I want to say this offense was terrible. It is not terrible now, and I think if anyone is shying away from Tate because of Tennessee, just take advantage of that as a dynasty manager and scoop him up because I think it's a great landing spot too. Theo, I agree completely. How about some of the losers on the rookie side? Who really got dealt a bad hand here?
I think, Omar Cooper is a player that I think we were pretty high on. I'm still betting on Omar Cooper, the talent, but Omar Cooper ending up as in some sort of a yak guy competition with Kenyon Sadiq, the manufactured touch guy. competition with Kenyon Sadiq, and then opposite a kind of mega target earner in Garrett Wilson, who we fully expect to get back in the 150 range. Like, Cooper's a bet on talent guy, but I think it seriously caps his year one upside outcome, where if he would have landed differently, he could have been a player I think we could have been a little more excited from like a redraft ends. From Dynasty, I think he's probably still fine. A number of losers in the running back department. I think the hope for like Mike Washington died, and a number of these other running backs sort of falling to day 3. We could make an argument Jonah Coleman getting to the Denver Broncos was a really fun spot for him, but it's still a considerable pathway for him as a takeover guy. So we would have liked to seen him maybe go on day 2. There was a few other wide receivers just sort of falling into that round 3 range when we would have maybe hoped for them to go in round 2. When we're betting on like historical hit rates, the hit rates go down considerably when you talk about going in round 3. But I mean, I think the positive was day 1 was a huge win for fantasy football. Day 2, pretty much a loss. There was a couple of fun ones. Eli Stowers, some mixed opinions on it, but Eli Stowers, I think the 2027 outlook for him, it would be hard for me to see him not ranked as a tight end 1 in Dynasty, provided they move off of Dallas Goedert. So I think he's sort of fine. Mekhi Lemon, if we would have had maybe him go to LA as opposed to Philadelphia, maybe the pathway towards wide receiver 2 viability in 2026 would have been a little bit lower, but the idea of him being in like a supercharged passing game, maybe that would have been a little bit better. But Mekhi Lemon, I think, is still fine, but obviously he's a little bit behind Tate and Tyson in terms of winners. But it was really the running backs, a lot of losers in the running back department. And there was a number of other sort of wide receivers and tight ends that we could have seen land more cleanly. So a little bit of a weird day 3, but I think day 1 was a big win for fantasy.
As you're looking now as a dynasty manager across the landscape, we're going to set this up as kind of buyers and then sellers and then holders. Who are the kinds of players right now, Theo, that dynasty managers should be trying to buy?
I mean, this is a time of year where I think there starts to be a little bit more clarity as to the direction of which way is this team going, which way is that team going in your league. It's very, very easy to tell the best teams in your league at this point. A little like simple rule is, if this team is impossible to build in redraft or in best ball, then it's probably a pretty good dynasty roster if it's one of those really good ones. But I think a lot of managers sort of enter the draft and then post-draft will have an idea, am I a rebuilder? Am I a contender? And I'm looking at some of for my contending rosters, am I able to make calculated moves with some of these rebuilding managers? And I'm specifically looking at a few older veterans that can be sort of mercenaries for my dynasty roster that can provide a ton of utility and help me win this year, where I'm getting a little bit of a discount because of their age. There's a few guys I'm always sort of gravitating to. I've made several trades in some really big formats for David Montgomery, who I think is set to have a really high volume and potentially highly successful role on a Houston Texans team that seemed to really gravitate towards physicality this year in the NFL draft. I think that David Montgomery, his 2026 season could look comparable to Joe Mixon's 2024 season if it all kind of falls into place. We know that he's able of kind of taking on a high volume role. He's an opportunistic pass catcher, and I think there's some hunger there where this is sort of like his last chance to put together a really high level but a high level NFL production this year. So I think David Montgomery, really, really fun one. I think he's sort of a really strong bet when you look at some of the running backs maybe ranked ahead of him, because again, you're getting a discount because of the age. The same flip side argument where I feel like this is a Terry McLaurin offensive focal point of Washington. He's a huge veteran winner coming out of the NFL draft. Not only does he avoid a Carnell Tate, a Mekhi Lemon, a Jordyn Tyson, guys that were sort of linked to Washington. There was also some people linking them to an Omar Cooper Jr., right. Maybe if they traded back. He avoids any wide receiver competition whatsoever, and he also avoids Jeremiah Love, who could be sort of a change agent that can completely shift what Washington's offense looks like. Terry McLaurin is really the only guy that is easy to project right now in Washington. There's other guys like Chigakonkwo and Antonio Williams, maybe Treylon Burks. They're going to get targets here, the Jalen Lane types. And then at the running back position, it's sort of a logjam of guys competing for touches. Terry McLaurin could end up with his highest number of targets that he's had at any point in his career. David Blau seems to really, really value him. And if we see them shift maybe 10% fewer rush opportunities for Jayden Daniels than we saw as a rookie just to protect their long-term quarterback, then I think some of those, you could see a little more easy button targets to Terry McLaurin, just sort of get him going. So I think 150 targets is in the range of outcomes. I think the market's a little bit lower on Christian Watson than it could be. Christian Watson has really, really high upside this year. Some similar arguments to if Green Bay, after 2 straight playoff losses, shifts a little bit away from ground and pound with Josh Jacobs as much as humanly possible. Jacobs also going to be 28 years old. Yep. He's also sort of a more expensive than Montgomery. He's also a solid buy. But if they shift a little bit away from let's get Josh Jacobs towards the very top of the NFL in terms of rush share and rushing attempts and all that sort of stuff, then I think that Christian Watson could end up being a major beneficiary. A lot of sort of enthusiasm for Matthew Golden, Jayden Reed bounce back, but Christian Watson, this team stuck by him and believed in him through the injuries, and I think him having a George Pickens-esque season is not out of the range of outcomes. I think he's really interesting. And then if you want to go with like a foundational piece to the Dynasty roster, I think with Declan Doyle taking over as offensive coordinator, do we see Baltimore being a little bit more balanced? I think Zay Flowers could set to have maybe a really strong season this year, a career year for him. And he was a borderline wide receiver 1 for last season, towards the end of the wide receiver 1 rankings. So I think he could end up with a career year as well, but he costs you a little more than those sort of older guys.
What are you looking to pay for something like these players that you've been talking about? What would you like to pay, and then what will you end up paying? Well,
I think a lot of times this time of year, if you're in competitive dynasty formats, I think you're not looking to rip people off, and you're not looking to sort of like go in there and sort of do the whole dance of I'm going to send a crappy offer and then hopefully he counters me, that kind of deal. I want to sort of build long-term relationships in my dynasty leagues where if people deal with me, they know that there's going to be honesty in the situation where we can come to an agreement. The worst feeling this time of year for Dynasty is when you see trades go down and it's players you would have been very interested in having on your roster, but you weren't even approached. And that probably has to do with the way that you've dealt with these managers in the past. So I play a lot of higher stakes FFPC Dynasty leagues, and I'm sort of paying market rates. I think for me, David Montgomery, trading a 2027 second for him makes a lot of sense. And if you're a manager who's in a rebuild situation, I think he's a player that you know you're not going to get a first for. You're looking for a cash out opportunity. You might view that as a fair offer. In single QB formats before the NFL draft happened, I was buying him for multiple seconds in single. So I ended up paying like a 2.8, 2.12 in a single quarterback. I don't think that deal's available to you at this point after sort of how the NFL draft and dynasty rookie landscapes are. And then Terry McLaurin, I've been OTC at the 112 and paid for Terry McLaurin in a single QB. And then in a start 10 format FFPC league, I paid a 112 for a Christian Watson. So I think a lot of it's sort of going rates for those guys. I think it makes a lot of sense. And with Terry McLaurin, the 112 manager is probably very happy to get, or the manager receiving the 112, probably happy to get out of the 31-year-old wide receiver, get some youth equity on their team. But for me, if I have a contending roster, I'd much rather have a guy I think could average 15 points per game. And I think McLaurin is always kind of viewed as he could really kind of age gracefully. Last year was his lowest points per game average of any point in his career. But the year before, he was just awesome. Set like the Commanders/Redskins record for the most touchdowns ever in a season. Obviously, he has the chemistry with Jayden Daniels that a lot of the players on the roster do not have. So I'm paying going rates for those guys. And I think most of those deals I mentioned, some people are really down on the rookie draft picks, but you're always going to have people in your leagues who want to embrace the new, want to embrace the rookie picks. And I think just treating people fairly and being like sort of honest with your trade negotiations will get a lot more done for you over the long term than maybe you're going to rip off some guy at one point and then sort of set your long-term negotiations back.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that because we get lots of questions of who won this trade, and I'm a big believer that the only right answer to that is both parties. I think everybody should win in a trade. It's better for the long run, as you say, for the league, for you as a trade partner. Switching over to the other side, we now have our rebuilders. Now, obviously, I think at this moment, the golden ticket for a rebuilder is a 2027 first. You did not say 2027 first with any of the guys that you mentioned, but I assume there may be some guys out there that if they were dangled in front of you, that might get it done, especially as a contender. But if you're on the rebuilding side, are there specific players or types of players that rebuilders should be looking at this time of year?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're in a true rebuild sense where you're in a deeper dynasty format, I think the general rule is I want to roster a lot of appealing handcuff running backs. It's always going to be a trade chip that if the manager holding the starter really wants to solidify their safety, you might be able to flip a guy who is kind of undeserving for a decent rookie pick for an okay rookie pick just by simply having him on your roster. I think if you're a rebuilding manager, there's been a lot of mixed opinions of this, but I like embracing Ty Simpson as a rookie draft target. The idea that you're going to have to sit on him for 2 to 3 years is real. But if you're in a rebuild situation, this year doesn't matter, and you're going to have this bartering chip or a long-term outlook guy that has a Jordan Love pathway. So if your situation changes and you suddenly become a contender, you're going to have a player that a year from now might be closer to his starting window and becomes a player you can move off your roster. He's just also a player from a game theory perspective that is not going to lose any value whatsoever. So I think he's a really, really fun one to embrace. And then I think another player that if I'm a true rebuilder, I'm going to embrace Carson Beck, because I think Carson Beck is going to give me an opportunity at a starting quarterback. There's only a finite number of them in your dynasty league. So if Carson Beck ends up a lot of people saying, Carson Beck might start for the end of the year. And I think a lot of us who had Jacoby Brissett were thrilled with the production we got from Jacoby Brissett. Right. But there's a massive disconnect between the dynasty community and the beat reporters as to what Brissett is. They want a change. He was 1-11 as a starter.
Right.
There's been a little holdout. So Carson Beck, it feels like a zero edge type player. But I think he might end up starting by week 6 if the Arizona season goes south. So you might end up with a player that you can flip. And then, there's a non-zero chance. I wouldn't bet on it, but there's a non-zero chance that he's more effective than we're giving him credit for because of the offensive environment he's in. And you might have an opportunity where he could be sort of a discount Tyler Shuck, a guy who makes a push to hold on to the job for next year if it all sort of bounces his way. So little doses like that if I'm a true rebuild situation. I mean, obviously 2027 firsts are like gold, and they're very difficult to get. I do think 2027 seconds are more obtainable. And if the class is as good as we think it is, then the 2027 seconds are also going to hold a ton of value. So I think getting those 2027 seconds, maybe there's trades I can make where I end up with 2 2027 seconds. I think those will be worthwhile, especially when we look at sort of the depth at the running back position that's up in this upcoming class. So moves like that for the rebuilders. I think also for rebuilders, it's sort of like trade timing. There's certain players you might be better off holding into the season. All kinds of ways to go as a rebuilder. But I want to maximize value on my team without paying any attention to, I need to fill out these spots, I need to fill out a starting lineup. You're a rebuilder, that becomes less and less important, even when we get into August, when it becomes paramount for the contenders.
Let's move over to the sell side. Now, of course, we've already talked about a couple of these guys, but who if you're looking to sell as a dynasty manager, just generally right now, and we'll get to contenders and rebuilders, but what kinds of players are you trying to unload this time of year?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of them that are interesting sell candidates. I think it starts for me with Bucky Irving, where Bucky Irving, I don't like any of the vibes coming out of Tampa with him. I didn't like the Kenneth Gainwell signing whatsoever. No. Introduced that sort of level of pass catching back, where Bucky Irving, a lot of the thesis with him is, he's this terrific pass catcher. It was supposed to get easier for him in terms of earning targets when he escaped Rachaad White.
Right.
Instead, they add a back that's sort of in better one. Then you add in last year, he sort of struggled to get back on the field, the foot injury, the shoulder injury, mental health stuff off the field. Like a lot of things sort of like piled up at once with him. And now you get to May, June, and the shoulder injury is still lingering. Not good. So I think Bucky Irving, it's sort of a big disconnect for me when I look at where he's ranked on some other sites, where he's at in terms of places like Keep Trade Cut. For me, he's one that I would consider getting out of. He sort of stands out. I think that there's a number of other players. George Kittle would be another one, but he's older. But I do think you've got a window of optimism on the injury side where San Francisco is sort of saying all the right things. A lot of people listening to this probably are like, I get it. He's already an old tight end. But the tight end position, I think there's still Kittle enthusiasm out there. A lot of people still ranking him as a top 10 tight end in Dynasty. I think he would be one that I'd be looking to get out of. Those two sort of stand out. And then really, I think being open-minded to, I'll trade anybody if the price is right this time of year. There's a lot of like, hey, this guy's untouchable. I think that's sort of the wrong approach here.
Right.
Anybody, you'll sell anybody in Dynasty if it makes your roster better and it makes your flexibility a little bit better in terms of winning this year or completing your goal for the future.
If you're a contending team, you talked, of course, about some of the guys already, but if you're specifically a contending team, who are you looking to unload this time of year, knowing that there's some balance between what your roster is now and what you want it to be in the future?
I mean, if I'm a contending team, I might be looking to consolidate in spots. If you're a contending team and your best attribute is your depth, then I don't mind trying to consolidate and get into better players. I think if I'm a contender with considerable depth this time of year, I'm going to look to try to acquire like guys who are at the top of the food chain and be pretty aggressive in those 2-for-1s, those 3-for-1s. And I think if your rookie draft hasn't happened, using maybe a player and a rookie pick to try to scale up and get a really obtainable, a really high-end asset that might be obtainable because of the team situation, where there's going to be managers who would benefit more from having multiple shots at it than just a single shot. So I'm sort of looking to kind of make those tier up type trades if I'm a contender this time of year. The players that I mentioned earlier, like the David Montgomery, Terry McLaurin, if those kind of players would enter your starting lineup right away, then I think if I'm a contending team, I'm going to go ahead and try to acquire them. Christian Watson, I think, is a fluid type asset where I'm looking to add Christian Watson to pretty much any kind of build, but I would gravitate towards a win now strategy because of his injury history. I do think there's a little bit to be said that Watson might have just solved his injury problems, and he might be in the clear. So having him as sort of a longer term asset might make sense. He's got contract insulation as well. So I'm looking to sort of make those sort of micro trades, try to tier up, try to get those players. I think it's, your roster better. But if I look at my roster and say, whoa, I've got 6 guys on my bench that will be locked in starters for half of my league, then I want to use my depth to my benefit and tier up and be a little less deep, maybe a little bit more fragile in terms of my long-term outlook, but have that firepower that if it all comes together, I'm really in great shape to win the league.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point about, can this guy go into your starting lineup right now? Because I think there is the distinction, and I'd love to hear your view on this, a distinction between trading as a contending team for starters for firepower now versus trading for depth or for handcuffs or insurance kind of policies on players. What are your thoughts on that distinction, and which strategy, if you just prefer one, which one do you typically find yourself pursuing?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I'm usually push the chips in guy and try to consolidate. But again, it's your league format. If you're in a 20-man roster FFPC league, it's easier to perform that strategy than like a 30-man roster MFL league where you feel like anybody worthwhile is going to be in your flex. It also has to do with your structure and your scoring format. There's going to be certain leagues with a heavy tight end premium where being really aggressive towards getting those elite tight ends might make more of an edge for you. If I'm in a league where there's no tight end premium, that sort of changes as well. But really, it's roster structure dependent and league scoring dependent. But everything being equal, I want to push the chips in and try to get those elite rule breaker type guys where it's more beneficial to me to try to get a player that is going to average 18 to 20 points in this season or have an opportunity to do so than maybe try to piecemeal it together with a number of 12 point per game type wide receiver 3 types and low end RB2s. So I'm sort of push the chips in and go for it type guy. But again, it all depends on your format,
right,
and your structure and your scoring.
You were talking earlier about 2-for-1, 3-for-1 kind of deals, and I assume that means to get the one. In this case, you're sending away some assets. What are the kinds of assets that you're willing to send away or looking to send away in those kinds of deals?
Well, I think it usually comes with trying to move up from a guy that's being pushed into like I would say the gravitational pull of the high-end wide receiver 1 or running back 1 that maybe doesn't have that RB1 type upside. The idea of moving off of an Omarion Hampton plus to go get myself a Jahmyr Gibbs would just be sort of like in the royal sense of what that sort of deal makes, where if a manager doesn't have the horses but he's holding a Jahmyr Gibbs, does he want to piecemeal it together with maybe a low-end first, Omarion Hampton, and a usable wide receiver? He might. Do I have a chance that Omarion Hampton could burn me in that deal? Yes. But I have a much better chance that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to smash in a major, major way this year. We've also seen a number of guys over a number of years that sort of get pushed up heading into year 2, where the idea being everything went well for them as rookies, therefore everything must explode for them in year 2 as sophomores. And that's been something that's burned some dynasty managers over the years, where you think of a Garrett Wilson, offensive rookie of the year, looked awesome, was still like a low-end wide receiver too, but there was all this hope and optimism in the fantasy community with Aaron Rodgers' acquisition that he was just going to go and become Devontae Adams. Didn't happen, and he cost dynasty managers a fortune that offseason, cost redraft managers a first-round pick, and now he's sort of settled into like he kind of is what he is. He's a really good asset, but he's not an elite one. We saw it last year with people wanting to push Brian Thomas Jr. and Ladd McConkey up the board about as high as they could, where it didn't work out. And people are treating BTJ as a player that you should take over Amon-Ra St. Brown in redraft and maybe over Amon-Ra St. Brown in Dynasty. Ladd McConkey was the big recency bias of he had that smash performance in the NFL playoff game. Now, Ladd and BTJ could really bounce back, but once you've sort of taken that hit and you've shown what a downside season can be, you lose that dynasty value because you're not Teflon. You're not one of these Bijan Robinson, Jamar Chase types that just hold value. So for me, I think looking at the year 2 guys and saying, are they being steamed up a little bit too much because they're second-year players? That's sort of a player that maybe I would move off my roster for somebody who is a true alpha, is a true league winner type, where I like having, I mean, Ashton Genty I think is a little different. But I do think like Omarion Hampton, there's a range of outcomes where he scores 20 touchdowns this year and burns everybody saying anything negative. There's another range of outcomes where he's like running back 13 this year, and he's really good, and he's really, really worthwhile, but he doesn't pay off at the 1-2 turn in redraft and best ball. And for Dynasty, you maybe wish you would have considered moving him. Right now, he's being priced like Jonathan Taylor year 2. So I think that's a little bit enthusiastic for Omarion Hampton, considering the number of mouths to feed in LA. Just players like that. I think really a player that we all love the talent, but the price tag might be steaming up a little bit too much. Tetairoa McMillan is an absolute monster, and I think he's got many, many years of production in this league. He's a wide receiver 1 type, but if I need high-end scoring from him this season, I have a little bit of trepidation about Bryce Young being able to support his wide receiver 9 in Dynasty price tag. So, like, for me, that's sort of guys like that I worry about a little bit, and it's sort of like it sounds almost like sacrilege to say that we should move off of a guy who's entering year 2. But I think just the way the Dynasty marketplace is, sometimes you are selling guys at the peak of their value, and maybe the market thinks that they're going to keep moving up when in fact they just sort of flatten out or move down slightly. It's just like stocks. There's nothing different. There's certain companies that are blue chip companies and you know it, but then you think about these companies that were really big at one point and then sort of crater down a little bit, and they're not really best of breed anymore. So it's the same thing with players in Dynasty. It's being able to identify who's real and who's very good, but the marketplace is thinking is this dynamic, elite, foundational piece where they're really maybe a little bit more like a wide receiver 2 than a wide receiver 1, or a top 15 running back as opposed to a top 5 running back. And those sort of margins and being able to understand value is sort of how you win consistently.
Yeah, I think you and I have the same sort of strong preference that if we're a contending team and we have the ability to improve our starting lineup, that's priority number 1. I have had a team that's very fortunate in its starting lineup. There's the price to get it any better is going to be a lot, so I'm actually going to need to look more toward the depth end to shore up my flank side on that. Are there any players or any types of players that dynasty managers who feel the need to build up a little bit of depth or have some higher quality depth behind some of their starters, any of those kind of guys that you would be targeting in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm specifically going for depth, then I'm looking at some guys that I think could be upcoming free agents that might be able to hit. I think a guy like a Jordan Addison right now, where we've seen Jordan Addison perform at a very high level. We've seen Jordan Addison maybe make some decisions off the field that you're like, what's going on there, Jordan Addison? But in terms of on-the-field production, he's had it. I think that the fact that he was arrested like a couple of times here or there, handful of arrests, that sort of made it where is his long-term outlook in Minnesota a little less clear? I think it is. But I do think if Jordan Addison enters the open market, there's going to be a number of teams lining up saying that this could be the missing piece. First-round draft capital, scored a ton of touchdowns, has had a lot of explosive plays, and he's 24 years old. So I'm looking at sort of those sort of players that could bounce back and regain value at any point. That would be the kind of depth that I would be looking to acquire. And I'd be looking at players where is the dynasty marketplace sort of mispricing them a little bit. I look at a guy like a Parker Washington where he's steamed up a little bit, but he's still like a low-end wide receiver 4 in a lot of people's rankings, which I think is egregious. I think that he's the type of player that is obtainable for all formats. 24 years old, looked like a Chris Godwin down the stretch last year. I think he's super, super interesting. And then I'm embracing some of these rookies this year where the market might be down on the rookie class. I'm going to look at some players that I think could end up hitting above their weight class, and I think are going to get good opportunities in 2026, but potential 2027 breakout guys. I think Antonio Williams this year is going to gain some value. I think Jeremy Bernard is going to gain some value. And then I look at Oscar Delp and Eli Raridon as two guys that could really be fun assets heading into 2027. And there's a major gap, a considerable gap between them and the Eli Stowers, Kenyon Sadiq tier. I mean, in some leagues, it's like 3 rounds difference, where if we go to 2027, those guys are both fun. And then I think also there's an idea that the Rams had the most touchdown passes to tight ends of any team last year.
Right.
They're using heavy. They mixed 4 tight ends in. They draft Max Clare in round 2. They draft Terrence Ferguson last year in round 2. Those two guys are so obtainable and so cheap that a double tap of Clare and Ferguson, if one can really separate from the other, and I have the roster flexibility to do so, having both of those guys rostered, no matter what your build, those two guys heading into 2027, if one separates, then there's a chance, not a great chance, but a chance that could be the number 2 option in the passing game behind Puka Nacua if they move off Devontae Adams. So I'm into it, and I think, is the tight end usage and the tight end targets indicative of do they really want 4 pass catchers at the tight end spot, or do they want it to end up being one guy sort of becomes the highest usage guy and the other 3 are sort of the stylistic guys? I wonder, and I don't think that they've got it all figured out either, but we've got sort of the brightest mind in football
Right.
attempting to do stuff there. So I want access to Sean McVay tight ends.
I like access to Sean McVay, anybody. I don't know that I want to try to figure out which of those tight ends I want to put in my lineup this week.
No.
But I do like about it, and I think you've hit it just right. I mean, they don't quite know yet how they want to arrange this. Sean McVay is a very recent convert to these multi-tight end packages. There used to be nobody who used 11 personnel more often than he did. But when you only really have one functioning wide receiver at times, you have to do something different, and this was part of his solution. And from a pure pro football standpoint, it's brilliant. From a fantasy standpoint, it's a little more challenging. We'd like a little bit more clarity there. I also love that you mentioned go ahead. Go ahead, Theo.
I was going to say also the success they had in the run game and how it consolidates the wide receiver targets as well. I think a lot of these heavy personnel, you're able to really get the right guys the ball, and you're able to make the running game more functional. And you're sort of able to put the pressure on the defense with what their personnel has to look like. So I can understand it from an NFL perspective.
Yep.
I think also from a team building perspective, tight ends are cheaper. Paying like the amount of money that has to go to wide receivers versus tight ends. So it's like game theory wise, if you're a general manager, sure, I'm happy to draft, a Max Clare in round 2, because if Max Clare gets a second contract and Jeremy Bernard gets a second contract, Jeremy Bernard's going to cost exponentially more, even if Max Clare outproduces him. So I think it's an interesting one, and I think we've also seen it from the top tight ends where multiple drafts now we're seeing tight ends go in the top 15-ish picks. That's out of the norm when we look back at how most drafts were for many years. So really a changing and evolving position, but I think one that we can find edges with in fantasy football if we sort of roll with the punches.
I think they're great guys to try to target. Do you look at all at contract kind of the situations or cap situations with teams as you're thinking about dynasty players over the next few years?
Yeah, I think you absolutely need to. I think free agents have been a significant edge, and embracing these free agents before they hit the market has provided a lot of returns. I think knowing who's going to be in the free agent, it's as simple as knowing who's going to be in the free agent class and knowing are the teams more likely or not to re-sign them. I think it's also important to look at, we're not quite as concerned about age apexes as we were maybe in the past, especially when it comes to the top players in fantasy football. But when it comes to, hey, I have a 30-plus-year-old at this position, and I just drafted a guy in round 3 with hyper athleticism, it's sort of an easy one to understand that Eli Raridon could end up being a really big piece of a Drake May offense, and he's got sort of the raw athletic ability at a position where athleticism matters more than any position in football, arguably, at the tight end position. And then Delp is interesting because there's a little bit more target competition with Tyson and Olave, but he's also this really hyper-athletic player. Juwan Johnson, the team really liked last year. Kellen Moore really liked last year. But again, them sort of getting out of a Juwan Johnson contract in 2027 is very doable. So both of those teams sort of showed their hands with Delp and with Raridon. And the good thing is, if we're wrong on this one and it ends up being another Hunter Henry year or another Juwan Johnson year, then you're using sort of low-end rookie draft capital on a player that still is going to hold some value, though. But it might be a little more Terrence Ferguson type outlook than what we're talking about. But I do think it's interesting that the tight end position in general, you had the most tight ends ever invited to the combine. So the NFL really valued this tight end class. And then we get Kenyon Sadiq and Eli Stowers, two guys where the fantasy marketplace were really over the top of these are the one and the two. I certainly was, and I think they're both really, really good players to roster in Dynasty. But if we have one of these tight ends ranked tight end 3 or below, however you shake it out, 2 years from now be the top fantasy producer at the tight end position from this draft class, then that's a huge, huge shift in win rates and potentially like a league-altering rookie pick for you. If you end up with a Raridon outproducing a Stowers or a Stowers and a Sadiq, then that Raridon pick becomes one of the best picks you could have made in your draft. and I'm seeing such a large delta. So I ended up drafting a ton of Eli Raridon in the third round in tight end premium formats because he was there. And Oscar Delp fell even more. I have some fourth round Oscar Delp exposure, which I was very surprised at. I know Brett Whitefield, who evaluates prospects for us from the film side, he's outstanding at fantasy points, and Delp was one of his guys. Delp's one of these players who never had more like a 25 catch season at Georgia, so like lacks considerable production. But in terms of what Georgia was last year, it was like a ton of Zachariah Branch kind of manufactured looks. Delp could end up being a guy where we look back and say, whoa, this guy exploded as an NFL player, fit in very well. And we've seen multiple tight ends have success with Kellen Moore on multiple teams, including Jawan Johnson last year. So just a lot to like about that situation.
Yes, I think there's one rookie league where I came away with Stowers, Raridon, and Delp because I thought those are the best values in each of those rounds. And one of those will be a tight end one, maybe two, possibly all three of them. I just love that kind of flexibility with those guys. In the position, as you say, it's evolving, has long been kind of looked down upon. I think that we need to wake up to the evolution of the NFL and the resurgence of that position. Just briefly, are there any kind of guys that you at this moment are just content to hold and wait and see what happens, like an A.J. Brown kind of type player? Is there something that you are very cautious about making a move either for or trading for or trading away right now?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think for me, it's a very hard one to kind of take because, again, it's sort of like if I get that strong offer, then I'm not going to say, hey, no, I don't want to move this guy because I want to see how he does in the first month of the season. But I do think there's something to be said with your A.J. Brown take where does the marketplace steam him up even more when he's moved to a team like New England? I don't know. I think it's already baked in. I look at the price tags over for like underdog, and a lot of times the best ball marketplace is kind of showing us where drafters are at because we're getting so much skin in the game. We're getting so much frequency of drafting. And Devonta Smith is being valued as like a borderline wide receiver one. A.J. Brown's being valued as a borderline wide receiver one. I don't think that happens unless the market's sort of banking on Devonta Smith is going to be the wide receiver one in Philly and A.J. Brown will be the wide receiver one most likely in New England. So I get it. I think that A.J. Brown is one where could I get more for A.J. Brown if he shows up to New England and dominates in the first month of the season and has a Devontae Adams LA like run? Then yes, I get it. But that being said, Drake May didn't really hyper target anybody. We haven't seen, and again, the sample size is so small for Drake May, and his highest pedigreed target earner last year was like a 32-year-old Stephon Diggs. So like A.J. Brown's obviously a game changer in terms of the level of talent. But I do think there's something to be said that if somebody wants to sort of overpay me for A.J. Brown or make a very fair offer, I'm open-minded to that one. I wouldn't say there's anybody who I'm like, I simply must hold. I'll give you one or two guys I would be interested in holding until the season actually starts. Jayden Reed is so steamed down right now in terms of what you're getting for him, in terms of dynasty trade value, that I'd want to hold on to Jayden Reed, even if we get these injury positive reports, because I think if Matthew Golden doesn't hit, Jayden Reed could end up returning to sort of being like that super exciting guy in the LaFleur offense. I also think there's an interesting sort of Jayden Reed take here where Green Bay loses Emmanuel Wilson, doesn't add anything at running back. We saw Jayden Reed his rookie year get those manufactured Debo-type touches in the backfield. Could we see a situation like that if Josh Jacobs goes down? So I think Jayden Reed has so many outs right now, and Green Bay just re-signed him. A veteran who I'd want to maybe hold into the season and not just fully dump right now would be a Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin's in like this spot where nobody's even thinking about him, but he's got the familiarity with Baker Mayfield. It's an offense we think is going to be good. And there's guys like Jalen McMillan, Ted Hurst, Tez Johnson that were like could take the next step, could see their usage increase, but probably the best bet to make is Chris Godwin just being a very strong number 2 target in this offense, and he's being priced like a really, really cheap. And then I think Jonathan Brooks is one where it's worthwhile to fantasy managers just to hold. You've held them this long.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to just sell them. I mean, and we've seen Dave Canales' offense just be so strong for running back production. We've seen Chuba Hubbard be benched before. I think the vibes for Chuba Hubbard are very good right now. But if Chuba Hubbard doesn't play well, or if he gets injured again, or if he regresses, then I think Jonathan Brooks is like one step away from an offense where Dave Canales every year seems to have a running back crush his ADP. Chuba Hubbard did it 2 years ago. Rico Dowdle did it last year. And then, of course, Rashad White in Tampa Bay destroyed his ADP,
right.
Was like a top 6 scorer, and you got him as like running back 24. So Jonathan Brooks at this point, I'm like, just hold Jonathan Brooks, see what happens. And if it goes to zero, it goes to zero. But
right.
if it hits, you could end up with a guy who could return to top 20 running back value in a very short period of time if he comes back and looks like old Jonathan Brooks.
Yeah, and at least if you're trying to move him at that point, he is now much higher in value at the moment, and probably could get
Absolutely.
nothing for him because I think the faith in him in the Dynasty community is very, very low at this point. Before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest mistake that you see Dynasty managers making this time of year?
I think the biggest mistake is trying to fill out a lineup. You don't have to fill out a lineup at all. You are in the month of May. This is like sicko season where a lot of people aren't even thinking about it once the rookie draft is over. Don't worry about filling out the lineup. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for you to address your team structure as the summer moves along. Of course, if you get the opportunity to add guys, add them, but you shouldn't feel the pressure to fill out that lineup. This is the time of year to have the best possible flexibility and the most value on your roster that you can. Then you're going to have the ability to really go and make some strong deals in July, in August, and just getting into the season. If I'm weak at the RB2 position in the season, but I have a ton of firepower, then I know it's sort of going to be an opportunity for me to sort of push the chips in when I have a little more clarity to go and make trades and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's really looking at your roster and saying, I need to have this spot, this spot, this spot, and this spot filled completely. That's right. Sort of a big mistake that managers make in startups. It's a big mistake that managers make this time of year. Just acquire value, do what you can to get value, and you're going to get opportunities to get more balanced and get your structure a little bit better as we get closer to the season. Don't feel the pressure to make everything look perfect in May.
That's great insight, Theo. Thanks so much. And great stuff all day long. Thanks so much for being here and joining me today. Before we go, Theo, tell everybody where they can find you. Pretty much any podcast they can find you, but where else can they find you?
Yeah, you can find all my Dynasty rankings and my written work over at fantasypoints.com. Updating the Dynasty rankings consistently. I write the Dynasty market report over at I almost said football, guys. Fantasy Points. A little
You're welcome to. Love to have
Freudian
you.
slip there. Shout out to Sigmund Bloom. But Dynasty Life is my Dynasty podcast. I'm dropping that like once a week all season long. You can find that over at Fantasy Points Dynasty YouTube. All of my content is over at Fantasy Points YouTube, Fantasy Points Dynasty YouTube. Make sure you go check out those two channels and you'll find all my stuff. I also record School of Scott with Scott Barrett once a week. You can find that anywhere you get your podcast, but that's also on the YouTube channel. So really, Fantasy Points YouTube, Fantasy Points Dynasty YouTube. I'm there every day, so you can find me all the time.
All right. There'll be links to that down in the show notes, particularly if you are on YouTube, but also check that out on Apple or Spotify. And thank you so much, Theo, for joining me today. And thank you, everyone who has tuned in, either on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. Please do me a favor and click the bell if you're on YouTube, like, subscribe. The best thing you can do right now to help this podcast grow and find an audience, a bigger audience, is to go over to Apple, drop a 5-star rating and a nice review about how either this episode or this show helps you to become a better fantasy manager. And we will be back again next week with another outstanding guest on Dynasty Compass.